At 2 in the morning, Seung-Ho sat alone in his private office, eyes fixed on multiple surveillance screens glowing in the darkness. The most feared mafia boss in Seoul had installed hidden cameras throughout his compound for one purpose: to catch the traitor bleeding information to his enemies. For weeks, he'd watched his associates, his guards, his business partners, searching for the crack in his empire. He installed cameras to catch a traitor. Instead, he discovered the one person who saw through his empire and into his empty soul. The timestamp read 2:47 a.m. when movement caught his attention. His executive assistant, Lexie, moving through restricted corridors. His jaw tightened. Then the camera cut to a room he'd forgotten existed, and everything stopped. She was singing, a soft, gentle melody to 7 children huddled in small beds, her voice carrying a warmth he didn't know could exist in his world. Seung-Ho's hand rose slowly to cover his mouth, eyes widening as the truth crashed over him. What could a mere assistant do? That would shake a man who's seen everything. Stay until the end. Her final act will leave you breathless. To understand what Seung-Ho saw on those screens, you need to understand the man himself. At 34 years old, he commanded the Baekho Group, Seoul's most feared organized crime syndicate. His name alone could silence a room. One phone call could end careers, lives, entire family lines. He'd built an empire where loyalty wasn't earned through respect, but through calculated fear. The business world knew him differently. To them, Seung-Ho was a real estate mogul, the brilliant mind behind Seoul's most lucrative property developments. Glass towers, luxury apartments, commercial districts that transformed neighborhoods overnight. His corporate office occupied the top 3 floors of the Baekho Tower in Gangnam, all marble and floor-to-ceiling windows. But beneath the legitimate empire ran a network of operations the authorities could never quite prove. Money laundering through property deals, protection rackets disguised as security contracts, information brokering that could topple politicians. Cold, calculating, ruthless. These were the words whispered about him in Seoul's underground. He'd taken control of the Baekho Group 5 years ago when his father was assassinated during a peace negotiation with a rival family. Seung-Ho was 29 then, and the betrayal taught him everything he needed to know about trust. He eliminated every person connected to his father's murder within 6 months. No mercy, no second chances. Since that day, he trusted no one completely. His inner circle was small, expendable, monitored. He lived alone in a penthouse that overlooked the Han River, surrounded by luxury that felt more like a prison than a home. Security cameras, bulletproof windows, armed guards on every floor. He transformed his life into a fortress, keeping the world at a safe distance where it couldn't wound him again. 3 weeks ago, information started leaking. Details about shipment routes, meeting locations, financial transfers. Small breaches at first, then increasingly precise. Someone inside his organization was feeding intelligence to the Kim family, his primary rivals. Seung-Ho had spent years maintaining a delicate balance of power in Seoul's underworld, and now that balance was tilting. He'd installed the cameras himself, personally selecting locations throughout the compound. Every hallway, every office, every corner where secrets could be exchanged. For 21 days, he'd watched the footage religiously, analyzing movements, conversations, patterns. He'd suspected his accountant, then his head of security, then his own cousin. He never suspected her. Late at night, when the surveillance footage was paused and the monitors went dark, he'd stand at his penthouse windows and look out at the city he controlled. Millions of lights stretched across Seoul, each one representing a life that continued without the weight he carried. Sometimes he wondered what that felt like, to sleep without calculating who might kill you, to wake without armor. He couldn't remember the last time he felt anything beyond control or rage. Until tonight, until he saw what Lexie had done. Lexie Davis arrived in Seoul 6 months ago with an MBA from Columbia and a resume that didn't match her application to his organization. She was overqualified for an executive assistant position, which made her either desperate or hiding something. Seung-Ho hired her for exactly that reason. People with secrets were easier to control. She was American, black, educated, and composed in a way that stood out immediately in his world of nervous subordinates and calculating opportunists. Where others bowed and averted their eyes, Lexie met his gaze directly during her interview. Not with challenge or defiance, just steady acknowledgement. She answered his questions with precision, asked about responsibilities rather than salary, and showed no visible reaction when his background check revealed exactly who she'd be working for. Most people couldn't hide their fear of him. Others couldn't hide their ambition, the greedy calculation in their eyes as they wondered how close to power they could climb. Lexie showed neither. For 6 months, she'd been perfect. Efficient, punctual, professional to the point of being almost robotic. She managed his schedules, screened his calls, prepared his briefings, and maintained a distance that felt deliberately constructed. Never warm, never cold. Just present, competent, unreachable. While other employees tried to curry favor or whispered nervously in his presence, Lexie treated him like any other employer. It fascinated him, frustrated him. He'd tested her. Everyone wanted something. You just had to find the right pressure point. He offered her a promotion 3 months into her tenure, a position as his director of operations that would have tripled her salary and given her significant influence. The kind of opportunity people sold their souls for in his world. She'd looked at him across his desk and said simply, "No, thank you. I prefer my current role." No explanation, no negotiation, just a polite refusal that left him staring at her retreating back, completely off balance for the first time in years. He remembered their first meeting more clearly than he wanted to admit. She'd worn a charcoal suit, her hair pulled back professionally, carrying herself with quiet dignity. After the interview, he'd made an advance, subtle enough to deny but clear enough to gauge her response. He was used to people saying yes to him, either out of attraction or strategic calculation. Lexie had met his eyes and responded with the same calm neutrality she'd shown throughout the interview. "No, thank you, Mr. Joe. I keep professional relationships professional." No fear, no apology, no pretense that she didn't understand what he was offering. It should have ended there. He should have dismissed her, hired someone more pliable. Instead, he'd given her the job and spent the next 6 months trying to understand what she wanted. Everyone wanted something. Money, power, protection, access. He'd watched her, analyzed her patterns, searched for the crack in her armor. She remained impenetrable, which only made his obsession grow. Now, staring at the surveillance footage of her singing to those children, he finally understood. She hadn't come to his world seeking anything from him. She'd come to spite him. The surveillance footage had become Seung-Ho's nightly ritual. Every evening after his last meeting, he'd lock himself in his private office and review the day's recordings, searching frame by frame for the traitor who was bleeding his empire dry. Tonight was no different. Coffee growing cold beside him, multiple monitors casting blue light across his face, the timestamp reading 2:17 a.m. Then he saw her. Lexie moving through the south corridor on camera 12. Nothing unusual at first. She often worked late, sometimes past midnight finishing reports he needed for morning meetings. But this wasn't the path to her office. She was heading toward the restricted areas, sections of the compound that housed storage and abandoned facilities. Seung-Ho sat forward, fingers hovering over the keyboard. Is she the traitor? The thought landed like ice in his chest. 6 months of perfect professionalism, and she'd been playing him the entire time. It made sense now. The overqualified resume, the refusal of promotion to avoid scrutiny, the impenetrable composure. She was too perfect because she was a plant. He switched cameras, following her progression through the building. She moved with purpose, no hesitation, like she'd walked this route many times before. His jaw tightened as she approached the east wing entrance. That entire section had been closed for 3 years, ever since structural issues made it unsafe. He'd posted signs, locked the doors, forgotten about it entirely. Lexie stopped at the heavy steel door, glanced once over her shoulder, then produced a key from her jacket pocket. A key he never authorized. Seung-Ho's hands gripped the edge of his desk as she unlocked the door and slipped inside. Betrayal tasted bitter familiar. He trusted her with access to his schedule, his communications, his daily movements. everything the Kim family would need to destroy him. And she'd been right there the entire time, close enough to hear every conversation, see every vulnerability. He switched to the interior cameras for the East Wing. The feed flickered, old equipment struggling to function after years of disuse. Static crossed the screen. The audio crackled with distortion. Then the image stabilized. Lexie appeared in the frame, walking down a dimly lit hallway toward a room at the end. The camera angle was poor, the lighting worse, but he could make out her silhouette as she opened another door. The audio glitched again, white noise filling his speakers. Then through the distortion, clear as crystal, he heard it. Children's voices, young, frightened, calling out softly in Korean and English. Seung-Ho froze, his finger suspended over the pause button. What he saw next would change everything. The camera feed sharpened, and Seung-Ho's world tilted on its axis. 7 children, ages ranging from what looked like 4 to maybe 12 years old. They occupied a room that Lexie had somehow transformed from abandoned storage into something resembling a dormitory. Small beds lined the walls, each with colorful blankets that definitely didn't come from his compound's inventory. Soft lighting, stuffed animals, children's books stacked on makeshift shelves. This wasn't espionage. This was a sanctuary. He watched, unable to look away as Lexie moved between the beds. A little girl, no more than 6, held up her arm showing a bandaged wound. Lexie knelt beside her, checking the dressing with gentle hands, speaking in soft Korean that the camera barely picked up. The girl smiled, her fear visibly melting under Lexie's attention. Seung-Ho's fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up footage from previous nights. Hours of recordings materialized. Lexie reading stories to children huddled around her. Lexie teaching them English phrases, turning it into a game that made them laugh. Lexie treating injuries, some of them severe, burns and cuts and bruises that told stories of violence he recognized too well. These weren't ordinary children. He knew trafficking when he saw its aftermath. These kids had been taken, used, damaged by the same underworld he navigated daily. Some of the injuries were weeks old, healing under careful treatment. She'd been doing this for months. He pulled up his compound's resource logs. Food inventory had shown minor discrepancies he'd attributed to accounting errors. Medical supplies from his private stock, disappearing in quantities too small to trigger alerts. She'd been stealing from him, but not for profit, not for betrayal. For this. The timestamp on the current feed showed 2:47 a.m. Lexie had finished her rounds and now sat on a chair between the beds. One boy, around 10 years old, was crying quietly. She moved to his bedside, placed a hand on his shoulder, and began to sing. The audio was clearer now. A gospel hymn, something from her childhood perhaps. Her voice carried a purity that seemed impossible in this place, in his world of violence and calculated cruelty. The words spoke of grace, of being carried through darkness, of hope that didn't require understanding. The children quieted, listening. Even the ones who didn't speak English seemed comforted by her voice. Seung-Ho sat motionless in his office, hand still covering his mouth, watching this woman he thought he'd analyzed and cataloged reveal herself as someone entirely different. She wasn't stealing his resources out of greed or ambition. She was redistributing his blood money into something clean. She'd built compassion inside his house of violence. And suddenly he understood why she never showed fear in his presence. She'd already faced horrors worse than anything he could threaten her with. She'd looked into the darkness that created these broken children and decided to fight it, even if it meant walking into the devil's compound every single day. Would you risk your life to save innocence in a criminal's house? Comment yes or no. Lexie had answered that question 6 months ago when she accepted this job. By dawn, Seung-Ho had conducted the most thorough investigation of his career. Every transaction, every movement, every second of Lexie's 6 months in his organization laid out across his monitors like evidence at a trial. The numbers were damning. $180,000, skimmed so carefully from his accounts that his financial team had marked them as minor accounting discrepancies. She'd taken from discretionary funds, operational budgets, places where the amounts were small enough to disappear into the noise of a multi-million-dollar empire. Food shipments diverted, medical supplies from his private stock. Cash withdrawals that matched perfectly with the forged documents he found records of, papers that would give these children new identities, new lives. In his world, people died for stealing $1,000. She'd taken $180,000. The penalty was execution. Always had been, always would be. Mercy was weakness, and weakness invited challengers. He'd built his reputation on absolute consequences. Everyone who worked for him understood the rules. But Lexie hadn't stolen for herself, and that distinction was tearing him apart. He pulled up her original background check, then went deeper, accessing databases that would have horrified her if she knew they existed. Her life unfolded in digital footprints and official records. Born in Atlanta. Younger sister, Maya, 9 years younger. Loving family until Lexie was 17. Then the news articles appeared. Maya Davis, age 9, abducted from a park. 3 weeks of frantic searching. A body found in a shipping container at the port of Savannah, one of 11 children discovered in a trafficking ring with connections stretching across 3 continents. Lexie had been 17 when they buried her baby sister. Seung-Ho sat back in his chair, something unfamiliar twisting in his chest. He understood trauma, understood the scars that never healed. His own father's assassination had carved him into someone new, someone harder. He could still see the blood spreading across the conference room floor, still hear the silence after the gunshots. He'd responded by becoming untouchable, by building walls so high that nothing could wound him again. Lexie had responded by walking straight into the fire, pulling children out of the same darkness that had swallowed her sister. Why would someone so intelligent risk everything? The question haunted him as the sun rose over Seoul. She had to know what he was, what he'd do if he discovered her theft. She'd worked for him long enough to understand that his organization didn't forgive, didn't show mercy. Yet she'd come here anyway. Taken the job, gained his trust, and used every resource she could access to save children from the very networks his world intersected with. Tomorrow morning, he'd call her into his office. He'd confront her with the evidence, watch her face as she realized he knew everything. What he'd do next, he honestly didn't know. And that terrified him more than any enemy ever had. The message reached Lexie at 6 in the morning. 3 words from Seung-Ho's personal line. "My office, now." She arrived 20 minutes later, dressed in her usual professional attire, hair pulled back, expression composed. But Seung-Ho had learned to read the subtle tells over 6 months of observation. The slight tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers gripped her portfolio just a fraction tighter than usual. She knew something had shifted. She entered his office with her head high, dignity intact even as she walked toward what might be her execution. He didn't speak immediately. Instead, he turned his monitor toward her and pressed play. The surveillance footage filled the screen. Lexie moving through corridors, unlocking the east wing, entering the room where 7 children slept. The timestamp showed last night, 2:47 a.m. Her singing drifted through his office speakers, that same gospel hymn that had stopped him cold hours earlier. Lexie watched the footage without flinching. When it ended, she lifted her eyes to meet his. No fear, no excuses, no desperate justifications, just that same steady gaze that had unsettled him from the beginning. The silence stretched between them, 30 seconds that felt like 30 minutes. The morning sun cast long shadows across his desk. Somewhere below, the city was waking up. Oblivious to this moment, that would determine whether a woman lived or died. "Do you know what I do to thieves?" His voice was quiet, controlled. "Yes," her answer came without hesitation. Then, with the same calm that had defined every interaction they'd ever had, she added, "But I'd do it again." His hand slammed down on the desk. Not in anger, something else entirely. Frustration, maybe, or the sound of his carefully constructed world cracking. He stood abruptly, walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows, turning his back to her. Seoul stretched out below, his empire built on fear and blood and absolute control. "You stole $180,000 from me," he said to the glass. "You used my resources, my security, my compound to hide fugitives. You've been lying to me for 6 months." "I have." No denial, no apology. He heard her take a breath, then her voice again, steady as ever. "Kill me if you want, but let me find them safe homes first. They've already lost everything once. Don't make them lose it again because of my choices." Seung-Ho closed his eyes. There it was again, that unfamiliar feeling tearing through his chest. He'd spent 5 years building himself into someone who felt nothing beyond cold calculation. 5 years convincing himself that emotion was weakness, that caring was the vulnerability that got his father killed. He turned to face her. "You didn't just steal my money, Lexie." She waited, that infuriating composure never breaking. "You made me feel something I buried years ago." The confession escaped before he could stop it. "And I don't know whether to thank you or destroy you for it." Seung-Ho watched the confusion flicker across Lexie's face. It was the first genuine emotion he'd seen break through her composure, and it oddly satisfied him to know he could still surprise her. "I'm not going to kill you," he said, moving back to his desk. "But you owe me a debt now. $180,000, plus the cost of my resources you've consumed, plus interest for the risk you've created in my organization." Lexie's eyes narrowed slightly. "I don't have that kind of money." "I know." He sat down, leaning back in his chair with calculated ease. "So here are my terms. You continue your work with the children, but now it happens under my supervision and protection. I'll fund the sanctuary properly. Medical care, food, education, whatever they need. And I'll use my network to relocate them safely, give them real futures instead of forged documents that might fail at the first background check." He could see her mind working, searching for the trap she knew had to be there. "The catch," he continued, "is that you stay by my side, not just as my assistant. You're bound to me now until this debt is paid. You go where I go, you answer to me. You don't make a move without my knowledge." "Why?" The question came sharp, suspicious. "Why would you help them? You profit from the same systems that destroy children like this." The accusation should have angered him. Instead, he found himself answering with an honesty that felt dangerous. "Because you're the first person who didn't see a monster when you looked at me." The words hung in the air between them. "Everyone else either fears what I am or wants to use it for their own gain. You looked at me and saw just another employer, just another obstacle between you and saving those kids." He stood, walked around the desk until only a few feet separated them. "Do you know how rare that is in my world?" Lexie held her ground, but he caught the slight acceleration of her breathing. The power dynamic had shifted. She was no longer his employee making autonomous choices. She was something else now. His captive, yes, but also his conscience, whether she wanted the role or not. He extended his hand. "Do we have an agreement?" She stared at his outstretched palm for a long moment, weighing her options. They both knew she didn't have real choices here, but he wanted her to take his hand anyway, wanted the illusion of her consent even as he trapped her. Her fingers met his, firm and steady. "I'll stay, but don't mistake this for loyalty." A smile curved his mouth, dark and genuine. "I don't want loyalty, Lexie. Loyalty is blind obedience, and that's worthless to me." He tightened his grip slightly. "I want you to see who I really am, all of it, and stay anyway." Within 48 hours, Lexie's entire life had been relocated to the compound's guest wing, 3 floors below Seung-Ho's penthouse. Her apartment in Itaewon sat abandoned, her previous life boxed up and stored. She was his now, whether either of them wanted to acknowledge what that meant. The proximity was suffocating. She shadowed him everywhere. Morning briefings where he discussed territory disputes with the casual tone most people used for weather. Lunch meetings where business partners visibly trembled under his cold gaze. Afternoon sessions reviewing financial reports that she now understood masked far darker transactions. But it was the evenings that truly revealed who Seung-Ho was. She watched him collect a debt from a restaurant owner who'd borrowed money to save his business. The man pleaded, explained about his sick daughter, promised he just needed another month. Seung-Ho listened without expression, then nodded to his enforcer. She had to look away when the beating started, but she heard every impact, every cry. "This is what happens when people don't honor their agreements," Seung-Ho said quietly beside her as they left. His tone was almost educational, like he was teaching her a valuable lesson. That night, she barely spoke to him. The pattern repeated: territory negotiations where he threatened rival families with casual brutality, strategy sessions where he planned operations that would destroy lives for profit. She witnessed the violence she'd only known abstractly before, saw the human cost of the empire she'd been working inside. Her disgust must have shown because he never asked her to hide it. He just watched her watching him, something unreadable in his dark eyes. 2 weeks into the new arrangement, Lexie woke at 3 in the morning to sounds from the floor above. Distress, movement, something breaking. Her instinct overrode her judgment. She took the stairs to his penthouse, used the access code he'd given her for emergencies. She found him on the floor of his bedroom, back against the wall, shaking. A nightmare, clearly. His eyes were open but unfocused, lost in whatever horror his mind was replaying. A glass lay shattered beside him. "Mr. Joe," she approached slowly, the way she would a wounded child. "You're safe, you're in your home." He focused on her, and for one unguarded moment, she saw everything. The fear, the grief, the loneliness that lived beneath his ruthless exterior. Then his hand shot out, gripping her wrist with enough force to bruise. But he didn't push her away. He held on like she was the only solid thing in a collapsing world. Lexie did something she knew was dangerous. She sat beside him, let him hold onto her wrist, and waited until his breathing steadied. She saw tears on his face before he turned away, quickly wiping them, rebuilding his walls with visible effort. "My father protected people too," he said into the darkness. His voice was raw, stripped of its usual control. "He tried to reform the organization, make it less violent. It got him killed in front of me when I was 29. Understanding crashed over her. His cruelty wasn't nature. It was armor forged in trauma and blood. The package arrived during breakfast. Seung-Ho was reviewing reports while Lexie sat across from him, picking at her food in silence. They'd maintained careful distance since the night she'd found him broken on his bedroom floor, neither acknowledging what had passed between them. His head of security entered, face ashen, carrying a small box marked with the Kim family seal. Seung-Ho knew before he opened it. He'd seen this tactic before, used it himself on occasion. But knowing didn't prepare him for the rage that ignited when he saw the severed finger resting on a bed of ice, a diamond ring still attached. He recognized that ring. It belonged to Chen, one of his lower-level operatives who'd gone missing 3 days ago. The note underneath was brief. "We know about the children in the East Wing. Trade the woman and the children or war. You have 48 hours. Kim Min-jun." Lexie went pale. It was the first time Seung-Ho had seen genuine fear crack through her composure. "How did they find out?" "Chen," Seung-Ho's voice was cold death. "He was the mole. Must have reported the sanctuary before Min-jun killed him as a message." His security chief shifted nervously. "Sir, we've secured the East Wing. Double guards, full lockdown." "You secured it after someone already leaked its existence." Seung-Ho's control shattered. He stood so violently his chair crashed backward. "Get me everyone who had access to that section. Everyone who knew. Now." Within 20 minutes, 5 men knelt in his private conference room. Seung-Ho circled them like a predator, his rage a palpable force. These were the guards who'd failed, the subordinates who'd missed Chen's betrayal, the weak links in his security. He grabbed the first man by the collar, slammed him against the wall. The violence came easily, channeled from the fear he wouldn't acknowledge. Fear for the children, fear for Lexie, fear that his world was finally extracting payment for everything he'd done. His fist connected with the man's jaw once, twice. "Stop!" Lexie's voice cut through his bloodlust. She stepped between him and the guard, her hand on his chest, not pushing, just present. "This isn't how we save them." Seung-Ho stared at her, breathing hard. Around them, his men watched in shocked silence. No one interrupted Seung-Ho when he was dispensing punishment. No one dared. They know where the children are because of these failures, he growled. And beating them won't change that. Her eyes held his, steady despite the fear he knew she felt. Min-jun wants a war, don't give him one, not like this. Every instinct screamed at him to push her aside, to finish what he'd started. Violence was his language, the only response he trusted. But her hand remained on his chest, right over his racing heart, and something in her gaze anchored him. He released the guard, who crumpled to the floor. When he spoke again, his voice was controlled, deadly calm. Get me everything on Kim Min-jun's current operations. I want his schedule, his vulnerabilities, his pressure points. He looked at Lexie. We negotiate, but on my terms. The meeting took place in a warehouse on the edge of Incheon, neutral territory where neither family held advantage. Seung-Ho arrived with 4 of his best men. Kim Min-jun brought 6, a deliberate show of superiority. And Lexie, because Min-jun had demanded her presence. Min-jun was younger than Seung-Ho by 3 years, handsome in a way that made his cruelty more disturbing. He smiled as they approached, his gaze sliding over Lexie with an assessment that made Seung-Ho's trigger finger itch. Seung-Ho, still playing savior, I see. Min-jun gestured to Lexie. First your father's weakness, now yours, you really haven't learned. State your terms, Seung-Ho said flatly. Simple, the woman and the 7 children. I'll traffic the kids to my contacts in Southeast Asia, good money in clean merchandise. And your assistant here, well. His smile widened. I'll break her slowly. Make sure everyone knows what happens to Seung-Ho's attachments. Good for business, you understand. Lexie's hand trembled slightly at her side. Seung-Ho noticed. He noticed everything about her now. I'll give you my entire southern territory, Seung-Ho countered. 4 districts, 15 operations, annual revenue of 40 million. In exchange, you forget the children exist and she stays with me. Min-jun laughed, genuine amusement lighting his face. I don't want land, Seung-Ho. I want your weakness exposed. I want everyone in Seoul to see that the great Seung-Ho cares about something. Because once they know that, once they see you'll negotiate for a woman and some orphans. He leaned forward. You're finished. The air thickened with tension. Hands moved toward concealed weapons on both sides. One wrong move and this warehouse would become a massacre. Then Lexie stepped forward. I'll go. Her voice was steady, that damnable composure back in place. Take me. Let the children go to safe homes and I'll come with you willingly. Time seemed to stop. Seung-Ho's hand shot out, gripping her wrist with bruising force. He yanked her back behind him so violently she stumbled. No, the word came out lethal, absolute. He turned to Min-jun, and everyone in that warehouse saw something shift in his expression. The cold calculation burned away, leaving raw possession. You want to know my weakness? Here it is. She's mine. Those children are under my protection, and no one touches what's mine. His gun cleared its holster in a fluid motion. The shot echoed through the warehouse. Min-jun's lieutenant crumpled, screaming, clutching his shattered kneecap. Non-fatal, but the message was clear. That's your warning, Seung-Ho said into the ringing silence. Come for them again, and I'll burn your entire family to ash. Min-jun's face contorted with rage. He stood slowly, deliberately. You just declared war, Joe, and when I'm done, I'll make you watch as I destroy everything you love. The woman, the children, every single person who makes you weak. He gestured to his men. They dragged the wounded lieutenant toward the exit. 48 hours, Min-jun called back. Then Seoul runs red. The moment they returned to the compound, Seung-Ho escorted Lexie to his penthouse. She went willingly at first, still shaken from the confrontation. But when she heard the electronic lock engage behind them, when she realized he'd activated the security protocols that made the penthouse impenetrable from both outside and in, her composure finally shattered completely. What are you doing? She spun to face him. Protecting you. Min-jun won't stop until. By locking me in a cage. Her voice rose, fury replacing fear. You just told him I was yours like I'm property you own. In his world, that's the only language that matters. Seung-Ho's control frayed. He won't touch you now without starting a war that'll cost him everything. You don't get to make that choice for me. Lexie's hands shook as she pointed at the locked door. You said you weren't a monster, that you were different. I never said that. His voice went cold, deadly quiet. You did. You looked at me and decided to see something good. I never claimed to be anything but what I am. The truth of it hung between them like a blade. You're the only light in my darkness, he continued, the words ripping out of him raw and unfiltered. The only thing in 5 years that's made me feel human. I won't let it die. I won't let him take that from me. That's not love. Tears streamed down Lexie's face now, the first time he'd seen her cry. That's possession. That's selfishness. You can't cage goodness, Seung-Ho. You can't lock it up and expect it to survive. It withers. It dies. The words hit harder than any physical blow. He stared at her, this woman who'd somehow become his entire world in 6 months, and saw his father's face. Heard his father's voice saying almost the same thing years ago. Fear isn't loyalty, son. Control isn't love. His hand moved to the security panel. He pressed his palm against the biometric scanner. The locks disengaged with a soft click. Then leave. His voice came out broken, barely a whisper. The children stay protected. I'll get them to safety regardless, but you're free to go. He walked past her toward his bedroom, couldn't bear to watch her choose the door. At the threshold, he stopped without turning around. I love you in the only way I know how, and I know it's not enough. Silence. He waited for the sound of the door opening, for her footsteps leaving, for the final confirmation that goodness couldn't survive in his world after all. But the door didn't open. When he finally turned around 20 minutes later, she was still there. Not approaching him, not running. Just standing by the window, looking out at Seoul's lights, tears drying on her face. Neither of them spoke. Eventually, exhaustion claimed them both. He lay on his bed fully clothed. She curled up on the couch across the room. Connected by silence, separated by everything they were and couldn't change. But together nonetheless. Dawn broke with both of them still awake. Lexie spoke first, her voice hoarse but determined. I have contacts. NGO workers who helped me identify the children, safe houses in Thailand and the Philippines. People who can give them real futures, not just temporary hiding places. Seung-Ho sat up, watching her carefully. Min-jun has eyes everywhere in Asia. Traditional routes won't work. Then we use your routes. She turned from the window to face him. You move things across borders that governments can't track. Money, information, people. You can get 7 children out of Korea if you want to. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. Using his criminal network to save innocents from the same system he profited from. But he nodded slowly. 48 hours before Min-jun moves. We'll need precision. They worked through the morning, spreading maps and contacts across his dining table. Her knowledge of legitimate channels combined with his understanding of how to circumvent them. She knew which NGOs could be trusted, which countries would ask the fewest questions. He knew which ports had compromised security, which officials could be bought, which smuggling routes were currently active. Professional, efficient, but something had shifted between them. When she leaned over the table to mark a location, he was hyper-aware of her proximity. When he explained a particular route, his hand would rest near hers on the map, not quite touching. You'll need to know how to protect yourself, he said that afternoon. Min-jun's people might come before we're ready. In his private shooting range, he stood behind her, adjusting her stance, his hands guiding hers as she gripped the weapon. His breath near her ear as he explained sight alignment, trigger control. The intimacy of the moment transcended the practical purpose. What happens after they're safe? Her question came quietly as she lowered the gun. He was silent for a long moment. Worry about surviving first. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have. The next 36 hours blurred together. Strategy sessions that stretched past midnight. Coffee at dawn while they refined evacuation routes. Her corrections to his plans, his adjustments to her contacts. exhausted trust building with every hour. Late the second night, reaching for the same document, their hands touched. Neither pulled away. They sat like that for several seconds, fingertips barely connecting, the contact carrying more weight than words could hold. "I don't know what this is," she whispered. "Neither do I," his thumb brushed across her knuckles. "But I know I've never felt it before." They'd fallen into something neither could name. Too complicated for simple love. Too profound for mere partnership. Born from trauma and necessity, grown into something that terrified them both. 24 hours until Min-jun's deadline. 24 hours to save 7 children and figure out if what they'd found in the darkness could survive the light. The evacuation began at 2 in the morning. 3 vehicles, different routes to the same destination, Incheon Port, where a cargo ship waited with a captain who'd been paid enough to forget 7 children ever boarded. Seung-Ho rode in the lead vehicle with 4 of his men. Lexie followed in the second with the children, all of them silent and wide-eyed, clutching small bags containing everything they owned. The third car provided rear security. They were 15 minutes from the port when the first vehicle exploded. The blast lit up the night, metal and fire erupting across the road. Seung-Ho's car swerved, avoided the worst of it, but the message was clear. Min-jun had found them. Gunfire erupted from both sides of the road, muzzle flashes in the darkness. Seung-Ho's men returned fire as he barked orders into his radio. The second vehicle, Lexie's vehicle, accelerated, trying to break through the ambush. But Min-jun's forces had anticipated that. A van pulled across their path, armed men pouring out. Lexie didn't hesitate. She threw herself over the youngest child, a 4-year-old girl who'd barely spoken since being rescued, covered the girl's body with her own as bullets shattered the windows. The driver slumped forward, hit. The vehicle careened off the road. Seung-Ho abandoned his car, sprinting toward Lexie's position. Everything else fell away, the strategy, the empire, the careful calculations that had defined his life. Only one thought remained: get to her. He saw Min-jun's lieutenant aiming at the crashed vehicle, saw Lexie's silhouette through the broken window, still shielding the child. His body moved before his mind caught up, throwing himself between them as the shot fired. The bullet tore through his shoulder. Pain exploded white-hot, but he stayed upright long enough to return fire. The lieutenant dropped. The next minutes were chaos. His men rallied, pushed back the ambush. Another vehicle arrived, backup he'd positioned as contingency. Lexie emerged from the wreckage, blood on her face but alive, children clustered around her. "Go," Seung-Ho shouted, clutching his shoulder. "Get them to the ship." She hesitated, torn between the children and him. He saw the moment she made her choice. The children first, always the children first. It was why he'd fallen for her. The backup vehicle raced toward the port. Seung-Ho's remaining men provided cover, holding the line as sirens began to wail in the distance. He watched through dimming vision as the cargo ship's lights grew brighter, as small figures climbed the gangway, as the ship pulled away from the dock carrying 7 children toward safety. Hours later, in a safe house across the city, Lexie's hands shook as she cleaned the bullet wound. The shoulder needed surgery, but they couldn't risk a hospital yet. Min-jun was still alive, still hunting. "You saved them," she whispered, tears falling onto his bare chest as she worked. "You took a bullet for children you didn't even know 6 weeks ago. You're not the monster you think you are." Seung-Ho looked at her through exhausted eyes. His empire was burning. Min-jun would retaliate viciously. Everything he'd built for 5 years was crumbling. And somehow, watching her cry for him, he'd never felt more human. 3 months passed like a held breath, finally released. The children were safe, scattered across international foster systems in 3 countries, given new names and new chances. Lexie received updates weekly, photos of smiles, report cards, small victories that proved trauma could be survived. The 4-year-old girl she'd shielded was learning to laugh again in a home in Vancouver. Seung-Ho's empire had survived, barely. The war with Min-jun had cost him territory, allies, millions in revenue. But he'd held the line, and eventually an uneasy truce formed. Min-jun still breathed, still schemed, but he'd learned that Seung-Ho would burn the world for what he protected. On a Thursday afternoon, Seung-Ho called Lexie to his office. The same office where he'd confronted her 6 months ago. He slid a document across his desk. "Your debt is paid. You're free to go." She stared at the release papers, her signature line waiting. Just like that. Just like that. He turned to the window, unable to watch her face. "There's a ticket to New York on my desk, first class, departure tomorrow morning." Lexie packed that night. Not much. She'd never accumulated many possessions during her time in his world. At dawn, a car waited to take her to the airport. Seung-Ho stood at his office window, watching the compound gates from 40 floors up. He didn't trust himself to say goodbye in person. He saw her emerge, saw the car door open, watched her hesitate. She looked back at the building. Even from this distance, he felt the weight of her gaze searching for his window. Then she turned away from the car, set down her bag, walked back through the compound gates. His heart stopped. Minutes later, his office door opened. She stood in the doorway, no words, just steady presence. She crossed the room and placed her hand in his. The choice made without explanation. "Why?" His voice broke on the single word. "Because someone needs to remind you you're human." Her fingers tightened around his. "And maybe because somewhere along the way, you reminded me I could be more than my grief." They stood together at the window, side by side, watching Seoul wake beneath them. Not captor and captive anymore, not boss and subordinate, just two broken people who'd found something unexpected in the darkness. Equals now, partners in whatever came next. In a world built on violence and fear, she became his conscience. In a life defined by loss and mission, he became her unexpected purpose. Some loves don't save you from the darkness. They don't erase the blood or wash away the sins, but they transform you. They make you believe that even in the deepest night, light can exist. Not pure, not innocent, but real. And sometimes, that's enough. Their story doesn't end here. Part 2 drops Sunday. Will his enemies come for her? Will she change his world from the inside? Can love survive when the past comes demanding payment? Comment transform if this story moved you. Like if you believe love can exist even in darkness. Subscribe and hit the bell. This series will wreck you in the best way. You won't want to miss what happens when she truly enters his world, and he discovers that loving her means confronting everything he's ever done.